Okay, this is Larry Staudt over in Ireland, and we're on to part 3 of the 6-part video series on That's Why I'm Here, which is the name of a book that discusses the meaning and purpose in life. So we started with a summary, and then we're moving on to some background information which will help us in our subsequent discussions of purpose and meaning in life. So this part is about how we, the human race, got here. So we've been through the summary and overview. Well, if you haven't been, I recommend you watch that video first, and then the second video, which is about where human beings fit into the grand scheme of things. And then this one is about how human beings got to where we are today. And with that in mind, we might even make some predictions of what the future might look like. So with all of this information in chapters 1, 2, and 3, we will next time go on to the main subject, which is meaning and purpose in life. So stick with it. You can do it. So just to recap, we have the beginnings of a framework for understanding life. We now know about levels of being. We know that life itself is extremely improbable, that a creator is probable, and religion, even though it's had a checkered history, has been a civilizing force over millennia and is probably it contains information from our Creator, which is an important thing to realize when you're subsequently seeking purpose in life. Well, the Creator knows the purpose of the created thing, which is us. And also, we talked about life after death, which also seems probable, though we'll never really understand it until we get there. But this ties into the discussion of meaning and purpose in life. So this time, as I say, we're going to discuss how human society got to where it is today. So what we're discussing in this video, this is an overview of this particular chapter, is that we talk a bit about the Big Bang, which we have talked about before, but repeating things is actually a standard technique in teaching. So anyway, we're going to talk about the likelihood of order versus chaos, and then we'll discuss evolution, human evolution, I suppose. And then social evolution, where society has been, and where it is now, where it might be going. And then also we'll discuss spiritual development of the human race. Life used to be very crude, brutal and short, and now we have a better idea of right and wrong, I suppose you could put it that way. So that's what we're going to be doing. So just to recap the idea of, starting with the Big Bang, that's the beginning of our tale of human development. I've read before this quote, but I'm going to read it again because it's great. It's from Bill Bryson's Short History of Nearly Everything, a book I recommend to you. In a single blinding pulse, a moment of glory much too swift and expansive for any form of words, the singularity assumes heavenly dimensions, space beyond conception. The first lively second produces gravity and the other forces that govern physics. In less than a minute, the universe is 1,000,000 billion miles across and growing fast. There's a lot of heat now, 10 billion degrees of it, enough to begin the nuclear reactions that create the lighter elements. In 3 minutes, 98% of all matter there is or will ever be has been produced. We have a universe. It is a place of the most wondrous and gratifying possibility, and beautiful too. And it was all done in about the time it takes to make a sandwich. That is just such clever writing, I think. So this explosion produced the ordered universe that we see. Not just order, physical order, but also life, consciousness, abstract thought. All these things appeared based on an explosion. I mean, all you can say is wow, because it's so incredibly unlikely. Explosions don't produce order, but in this case they did. It did. So on the theme of order versus chaos, I think I mentioned in a previous video that there's a law in science called the second law of thermodynamics that says order is improbable. And so I always mention that anyone with young children knows that this statement is true. Order is improbable. Chaos is the norm. But in spite of this law, we look and we see an extremely ordered universe, and therefore a universe that's extremely improbable. So you might remember the story I told about friend A and friend B. Friend A produced a working model of the solar system, and friend B, who didn't believe in a creator at first, when he saw the model, he realized that if there's order, then there's an ordering force. It's just a simple fact. We don't have to talk about the nature of that ordering force just yet, but that there is an ordering force. And since we're a product of that creation, then the ordering force is superior to us, of course. So it has been said that if you have enough monkeys and enough typewriters, you will eventually get the works of Shakespeare typed out. In practical terms, this is false. So it's a common misconception. And I have a quote that's probably going to put you to sleep. But anyway, it's by this engineer quoting a mathematician regarding the probability of producing a line of text. A full appreciation of the beauty of nature's order can best be realized by comprehending the limitations of chance events. A valuable measure of the limitations of chance events is provided by the prominent Canadian physicist George Gamow, or Gamow. He's credited with confirming the mathematical probability of the chance formation of a line of text in a book. One line, not the complete works of Shakespeare, one line. For the proper positioning of 50 letters, numbers, and punctuation in an average of 65 spaces, Gamow confirmed that the coincidental probability is 1 against 10 to the power of 110. In other words, 1 with 110 zeros in front of a 1. The age of the universe in seconds, not in front of a 1, following a 1. The age of the universe in seconds is less than 10 to the power of 18. On that basis, were there a billion permutations in every second, then the time required to get 50 characters properly ordered in a line of a book by chance events is more than 10 to the power of 80 times the age of the universe. Thus, the chances against the random creation of an ordered line in a piece of written literature are incredibly immense. It ain't going to happen randomly, and that's one line of text. So these things were not appreciated until fairly recently. Making marks in my book here. Another thing that he said was regarding DNA, an enormous volume of very precise information and directions are contained in DNA. Human DNA is a submicroscopic spiraling helix ladder with 3.2 billion pairs of nucleotide rungs, also referred to as letters. So now we're back to this idea of letters, with each rung carrying distinct, detailed instructions. It is estimated that the DNA threads inside the body of a single person are long enough to reach the moon and back 100,000 times. The coded strings are made of common biodegradable elements. The creation of millions of miles of coded strings cannot happen by itself. So there you go. That's monkeys and typewriters. The multiverse theory we talked about. It says if there were enough universes out there, one of them was bound to be ordered. Even though the probability is extremely small, if you have enough of them, then one of them is going to be ordered. And the multiverse theory is increasingly discredited in science these days, mostly because it can't be tested. So it's just an idea, not science. So on to the DNA. Again, DNA in the first cell could not simply appear. It's a line of code. It's like computer code, and therefore there has to be a programmer. Not only that, over time, like in Hariri's book about human evolution, which we're about to get into, he sort of explains away the events during human development as random mutations. Well, random mutations of DNA is like taking a computer code and randomly changing some of the ones into zeros and zeros into ones. The chances are 100% really that this will degrade the information in the DNA as opposed to improve it. So the computer code analogy works really well. Okay, so let's take a look at the timeline of when things happened over the course of human development. And this timeline is taken from Hariri's book called *Sapiens*, quite a popular book regarding the development of the human race. So 13.5 billion years ago, the universe forms in the time it takes to make a sandwich. And then 3.8 billion years ago, really, we have the beginning of biology. Life begins. 2.5 million years ago, so not very long ago at all, you end up with the genus Homo in Africa. And then 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens, the species. We had the first record of that happening. 70,000 years ago, there was this thing that the scientists call the cognitive revolution. And it's when human beings started to work better in groups and seemingly started defying the laws of nature. One of the evidences of this, unfortunately, is in Australia. So human beings made it that far, having started in Africa. And pretty much as soon as they arrived in Australia, they wiped out all of the large creatures there. Don't you love it when we make use of our free will to do stupid things? Then, 16,000 years ago, the same thing happened in America. Those human beings, they're misbehaving again. 12,000 years ago, the agricultural revolution started. We started, planting food for ourselves. And 10,000 years ago, give or take, monotheistic religion is recorded. 5,000 years ago, 500 years ago, the scientific revolution began, where we started thinking logically about our ideas and testing our ideas. What a novel idea that is. And then 200 years ago, the Industrial Revolution began, where we started really enthusiastically advancing, quote unquote, civilization. And it carries on to this day. So at the moment, in these decades, a global civilization is emerging for the first and only time in the history of humanity. So it's a very exciting time, because it's going to be a long time before we have a civilization that extends beyond our galaxy. Okay, so let's take a look at this and pose the question, when did we become fully human? And this is not a known thing. I'm just proposing an idea. So we know from the fossil record that physical evolution is a thing, and this whole process took place over billions of years to get where we are today. And my thought, and I'm not the only one thinking this, but anyway, is that possibly we became fully human with the appearance of free will during the cognitive revolution. So it's easy to imagine that at one stage we were happily living our animal lives in whatever form we were in, whatever we looked like, and we were just behaving like every other animal, according to the laws of nature. And so I would propose that within us was this latent capacity to have free will, that it was destined to appear at some point. In the same way, if you looked at a human embryo, when it only divided a few times, you had this little blob of cells with no organs that can be detected, and you say to somebody who doesn't know any better, actually, this thing is going to have eyes in a few months, they would be doubtful, However, the process exists where that will happen every time. And so in the same way, even though human beings didn't necessarily look much like human beings in our distant past, we were always going to become human beings. And at some stage, we were living animal lives when the latent capacity of free will became manifest. I think that might have been during the cognitive revolution, because we started behaving outside of the laws of nature, where we were destroying entire populations of creatures, obviously not because we needed to. There was plenty of food around, but we decided that was the thing to do. So that's too bad, but that's what happened when we discovered our free will, and we could start misbehaving, start behaving outside of the laws of nature, which happen to be the laws of our Creator. So we see that the universe keeps moving to higher and higher levels of complexity and order, which is just very unlikely according to the second law of thermodynamics. But nonetheless, that's what's going on as we evolve. And since that's what's going on, there must be an ordering force in the universe, or what Einstein called an illimitable superior spirit. Another way to think about this is the owner of Tesla, or the CEO of Tesla auto company, is Elon Musk, and he has said that making a prototype of a new vehicle is really not the challenge. You know, it's something you can do and have a lot of fun doing. But to actually start producing it in any volume is the real challenge. So the challenge is to design and make the machine that makes the machine. So we see that a factory is a complex thing. Yeah, so in one side you have all the raw materials and bits and bobs, and out the other end comes the product, in this case, an electric car. And it took a lot of effort to put together the process that resulted in this very ordered structure called a car. Well, guess what? It also took a lot of design work to create a universe that things went from dust to the wonders of nature that we see around us. And but that process had to be designed. And so, unfortunately, old religion initially said that evolution never happened, right? That the Bible could be taken literally, and poof, there we were. And but science has shown this is not the case. However, the fact that order has appeared out of disorder is a very strong argument for the involvement of a creator in creation. New science said, as we have discussed, that evolution was random, and through random mutations in genes, new species evolved and this kind of thing. But we've already shown that mathematically the probability of that happening is somewhere very close to zero. And so I think the argument of the creative design scientists is the most likely theory that, yes, things have evolved, but there needed to be an ordering force behind this evolution. So I have a quotation from one of my favorite scientists, Dr. Neil Turok, and I suspect he'll be getting a Nobel Prize before long. He was a colleague of Hawking. He said, I don't think we're random. We are to some extent random. Of course, each of us is a random individual. But the fact that life emerged in the universe is very likely anything but a random occurrence. It sounds mystical, but I don't think that should detract from it. He goes on to say that we may be the most complex things in the universe. And so higher levels of complexity is more and more unlikely. And the fact that we not only have life, we have consciousness, we have the capability of abstract thought, and seem to be unique in that respect, as far as we know so far, means that we're among the most complex things in the universe. We are the most complex things that we know of. So what about social development? We've also seen increasing levels of complexity. It's interesting to think about where human society is headed, because a lot of us quite rationally think that we're headed down the tubes, because we have so many problems. However, there are other points of view, and here's one to give you a bit of hope, I suppose. If we look at peace instead of war, so where was the area of peace in the past? And so let's start from the cave once again. And so there you are in your cave, living with your family or extended family, and you defended your cave. And within your cave, it was peaceful. It was a place you could relax, as long as you had a sentry at the front of the cave, I suppose. So the area of peace was rather small. Then, over the course of millennia, people started gathering in villages. And within the village, there was peace. You might be worried about, the tribe over the hill coming and attacking your village. But within your village, you have peace, which is a lot bigger zone than a cave. Then villages, banded together and created kingdoms. And so now within the kingdoms, you had peace. So much larger area of peace. And finally, kingdoms became nations. And so we have today, within most nations, an area of peace. But you might worry about your neighbor sometimes. So this process took a very long time to develop. And so the question has to be asked, will we continue on this path of increasing areas of peace in areas that are now more ordered, because everybody's working together to some degree in these areas? So the obvious thing, and where we're headed, is a global civilization. We're actually moving that way now. People talk about globalization with great worry, because our leadership, among other things, has no idea why we're here. And so decisions are made that are unreasonable, illogical, and all the characteristics of adolescence, you see. But anyway, world civilization is the obvious and necessary next step, because we cannot regulate a world society without world-level institutions, some world-level institutions, with as much as possible done at the local and national level. But to deal with global warming, sounds like a global problem to me, and plastics in the oceans, and when nations attack other nations, there needs to be a world-level response to that. So we're not quite there yet, but that's probably what's coming next. So finally, we'll take a look at spiritual development of human beings. And history tells us that religion has periodically provided moral guidance that uplifted civilizations. And especially in the early days of the great religions, they had a very positive effect on civilization. It gave people a context within which to live their lives. In its purest form, it's information from the Creator, who says things like what we find in the Ten Commandments. And we have to agree on that stuff, you know. Today, we're kind of making up our own moral code. You know, I know what's right and wrong. Well, actually, you don't. You have a feeling for it, but you don't know. And we have to have an agreed standard of behavior. And what better place to get that from than our Creator? So we need to revisit religion, but this time with wide open eyes. But don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, as they say. You know, there's good stuff in religion. In the past, religion was brought to us, to the illiterate masses, by an indispensable and educated priesthood. So they did good things. And as I said before, over time, man-made ideas crept in, and social conditions changed, and the positive influence of religion declines. But then it's renewed, you know. So when Christ came, he renewed much of what was in the Judaism. He said, if you had known Moses, you would know me. So it's all one process. And it seems to, every 1,000 years or so, you know, renew itself. But clearly in this day and age, as we all become educated and independent thinking human beings, we can accept or reject the teachings of any religion that we find. So that's one thing, and it's a very adolescent thing, isn't it, to reject stuff that your parents tell you. But you haven't really thought about, you know, an alternative point of view, but you know that the parents' point of view has got to be wrong. So with this ability to think independently and to operate outside of a priesthood, we become responsible for our own spiritual development. It's a responsibility. It's something we have to do. And we're not doing at the moment. But then again, we're adolescents, so we'll get there. So this spiritual development is now in our hands. It demands action on our part. As adolescents, we have this urge to act independently, which is good and important and is a great thing about adolescence. But we often don't think before acting or forming conclusions. And that's sort of where we are today. You know, I had one of my daughters announce one day, she says, I think I'll be a Buddhist. I said, oh, really? You know, knowing this was a good thing. And why? She said, I think it's peaceful, which is really sweet and probably true. But she had done no investigation of the subject whatsoever. She just had a feeling that this was a good thing, you know. And that was going to be it. That was to then declare herself a Buddhist, which she didn't end up doing. But we need to, in the past, religion has been so illogical that we don't have so many problems saying, I believe this. Boom. You just declare this to be your belief, but you haven't really thought about it. And so now as we approach maturity, our beliefs, what we think is true, has to stand up to scrutiny. And that's kind of a new thing for us. We'll get there. And over the next number of centuries, we will mature as a society. It'll take a while. And things will definitely improve, and we'll end up with a global civilization that functions well. So in the future, spiritual truth suited to mature contemplation will be discovered, because it's out there, but we are not given it on a platter. We have to discover it through our own endeavor. So I want to encourage everyone to start investigating the spiritual truth that's out there, and I think you may have some pleasant surprises and come up with truths that are acceptable to this day and age, acceptable to the heart and the mind at the same time. You don't have to separate the two when thinking about spiritual things. Some of the truths that are out there to be found are gender equality, which we all have a feeling for anyway. But a wise woman once told me, she said, a soul is a soul is a soul. And when we arrive in the next life, we will be without our bodies, friends. And so now the question of male and female becomes interesting. So a soul is a soul is a good thing to remember. And that's true in, when you think about different races as well, different bodily attributes. Another neat idea that's out there is the oneness of religion. So if there's one creator, then in effect there's one religion. We're all students in the same school, the entire human race. And there are great similarities between religions. And obviously the oneness of humanity. There's only one human race, and we are in the process of figuring out how to live together on this planet as a global society. And these things will take time to percolate, through society. But because they're fundamentally true, they will be increasingly understood, and society will eventually know that these things are true and will act accordingly. And one thing I probably should have said is that right now, as a race and as a civilization, we don't know why we're here, and so we're not organizing ourselves according to any particular theory of what life is about. And that's an adolescent thing to do. However, in the future, we will come to these conclusions, that our Creator has provided us with information which we can implement and in our individual lives and also in our collective lives. So in summary of this, the final section on that has background information, the physical universe has evolved to ever-increasing levels of order, which is very unlikely. Our society has also evolved to ever-increasing levels of order, which is also unlikely. Scientific and religious understandings are beginning to merge because we are now thinking independently as human beings, and at least trying to reconcile some of the seeming conflicts between science and religion, and I think we will succeed. A global civilization is inevitable, but equally the steps to get there are not clear. And so I go back to my example in a previous video of a villager in Gaul trying to imagine how the great nation of France will appear. And the answer is, it's just not going to happen. I'm sorry, because the steps to get there were not at all clear to the villager. However, a global civilization has to be crafted, and because without it, we're just not going to be here, And but I'm fully confident we will work out the details, even though they're not obvious at the moment, On a spiritual level, we will become increasingly responsible for our own spiritual development with the full knowledge that that's what we're here for, And we're going to be born from this life into the next life, and we better be ready. That will be a major thesis of the next video, which is about the 4th chapter of the book, which finally talks about purpose and meaning in life.